So, boarding schools. I think for a majority of us, we attended boarding schools, and most of us don't really talk about the stories or what happened in those schools, because maybe we think it was normal. And I think boarding schools are one of the biggest brewers of confusion in basically in Kenya, because a lot of things happen in boarding schools. And I am talking as somebody who went to boarding school as a student, and also went back as a teacher. And personally, I am not for boarding school. I think it is a very, even for the period that you're there, it is a very vulnerable time to be there. You're still young. You are young. You are still coming up. There are all these changes. You are asking a lot of questions, and it's just not a place to be around with strangers when you are learning, like you are up and coming. And we've had a lot of stories about boarding schools, and over the years the stories have faded because I guess those cases are less or something. But boarding schools used to be there was a comparison between boarding schools and prisons, and you can clearly see it's the same concept. So first of all, as a student, I am a person who never really enjoyed school. It was we just went there because we were supposed to go, and not that I didn't do well. I was actually those people who did quite well. And we hear all these stories in boarding schools, and some things have not really been talked about because experiences were different, I guess. So back to my boarding school. Personally, I didn't like boarding school. It was, the first year was okay. The first year I was in Form 1, and the guys, I knew a couple of seniors, so Form 4s by then. And it was good for me because I had people around me. It was not necessarily good for other people because they didn't have people to protect them. So I remember in, let's say it was around Form 2, when now the guys who are looking after me had like gone. And the ones who remained like saw an opportunity to just bully me. And I remember Form 2 was the worst year for me in boarding, because there was a lot of bullying, there was a lot of beating, and I just hated school in Form 2. It was not the best place to be. And imagine just being bullied around, having problems from home already, and life just sucked, man. Life sucked in boarding school for me. I won't lie. Eventually, I made some good friends when in Form 3 and 4, and we had lots of fun. But there is nothing really that sticks out when I think about my boarding school. Like the only day I remember is there is a day there was like a strike in the middle of the night, and it went like up to around 2 or 1 or 3 there, I'm not sure, but that was the wildest of my boarding school that I can really reflect and say that that day I really liked it. But for a majority, over the years you come out of these schools, and like I say, as a teacher I go to some of these schools, and what you see there, you see a whole different picture, and you hear a whole different picture, and you're like, this boarding school is not really worth it, because apart from the bullying and the caning back then, it was just it was a horrible place to be. It was just a horrible place to be. I mean, I met a couple of nice people there. I met some really nice friends. I made some really nice connections. It was a nice place to be. I won't deny. But generally, like, if you ask me about my experience, nothing really stood out apart from that day, and it sucked generally. We were being beaten by our fellow. Imagine being in Form 2 and a Form 3 is beating you because they are a student leader. So they had too much power, such that they used that to make our lives miserable in school, and I don't like, I am against boarding schools. Like last year we saw this trend in my prime, and the things that were in that trend, that was boarding school for girls especially, because like we said, boarding schools are just prisons. There is the bell. You're not supposed to walk around without permission. Even when you're going to toilet, you have to ask for permission. You have a timetable, you have a routine. You're supposed to be up at this time. There is the bell. There's been that comparison, and I think for most girls, boarding school was some of the things I saw in my prime. I you know, some of these things, as you grow up, you hear of them and you're like, are these things really real? And then you talk to people, like real people actually, and they tell you how it really was, and you see how it was just not it. I don't have the words for it. It was not a weird place to be, but let's just go with weird, because and people know that in my prime trend, okay, most of those stories were fake, but also most of them were true. So even in terms of how people relate to teachers, how teachers handle you, how workers handle you, and boarding schools makes you feel like it molds you to survival. Like, that's it. It molds you to survival, such that you really can't think outside the box. It boxes you to something that this is it, and you have to survive. They make it a big deal, and people have done some crazy things, man. Like, there's no trend that I had to like sit down and think about like that in my prime trend, because like we said, most of those things are happening, and it is in high school that people in high school are trained in things. Like, I remember I started drinking in high school. All these lesbianism things, they start in high school. The drugs in high school, the pedophilia in high school. So I was just trying to see, okay, what was the real concept behind boarding schools? Like, okay, so there was to give enough time for learners to learn. There was to encourage group work, and it was a place where people are supposed to learn some sort of independence from parents. But majorly, the more I come to think about it, they were just a training ground for I don't know what. It was a molding place for vices. Let me put it like that way. For a majority of people, boarding schools were a training ground for your vices. And they made sure that we didn't really talk about it or say a lot of things. That is why, and somebody recently encouraged me that when somebody says the usual or the normal things, just feel encouraged to inquire more, because my normal might not be your normal. Because if I am talking to a girl and she's telling me that she back in back in boarding school, she had this boyfriend, and the boyfriend was a teacher, and the boyfriend sometimes sneaked her out of school during the weekend. And I'm thinking, this is a form 3, and this is somebody who is almost 30. And some of these girls, this is just one girl, but if you check around, it is, if you really ask around and be keen about it, it's a common thing. And for them it is normal, so they will not really talk about it like it's something off out of this world. So I think boarding schools should just be done away with, man. Like, things that happen in those schools, parents just get rid of their kids because uko nyumbani bana mnakula sana, hamshibi, sijui nini. But how are you giving your child to strangers and you don't even follow up? So try to really be close with these, especially the teenagers. A lot of things happen in schools, yeah. So try to talk to them, ask them about the school. What is it about? Why are they mentioning somebody too much? What is going on there? Visit those schools. Ask the deputy, who is this? Just be more active in. As long as you have a child in boarding school, you have a lot to fear. Your child is not that safe in boarding school. Parents assume that as long as they wamefikia walimu will take care of it, and that's fine. But imagine giving your daughter or son to a stranger and just believing them because they did a course, yeah. So let us be very mindful of boarding schools. There is a lot going on there. There is a whole lot going on there, yeah.